Hey guys, tonight we journey to some of the absolute worst places you could have found yourself living in the medieval world. Forget cozy castles and romantic moats. This is about mud, plague, and very bad smells. You're about to step into frostbitten shoes, wade through sewage, and probably lose a few teeth to a combination of famine and frustration. Imagine the icy wind scraping across your cheeks as you step off a creaky boat into a desolate, windswept outpost at the edge of civilization. Welcome to Norse Greenland? Yes, Greenland. That massive icy rock where the Norse tried to farm like they were still in Norway and then acted confused when everything died. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are now? Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge off the longship, boots crunching into a frozen shore that doesn't even pretend to be welcoming. There's a bleached whale skull half buried in the frost, and your breath instantly fogs into tiny clouds. The Norse Greenland settlement, founded around 985 CE by Eric the Red, is less of a village and more of a stubborn dream someone forgot to cancel. At first, it looks kind of rugged, quaint, even turf-roofed houses poke up like mossy mushrooms in them, and the people seem hardy. But then you realize there are no trees. Zero. The Vikings here had to import timber from Norway. You want to build a barn grate? Wait 3 years for a boat. Farming. Good luck. The soil is basically permafrost. The short summer gives you just enough time to coax out some barley or maybe a turnip if you sing to it. Mostly, you live off seal meat and whatever dried fish you didn't misplace last season. The cows. Oh yes, they're here. But they eat stored hay. And when the hay runs low, well, the cows start looking at you funny. And remember, you're not just cold, you're isolated. Greenland is 800 miles from Iceland, and even Iceland is like the rural DMV of medieval Europe. Ships come sporadically, and storms love to smash them into icebergs like Norse-themed disaster movies. One letter from 1400s Iceland asked Greenlanders if they were still alive. It took years for a reply, and even that was like, yes, barely. Historians still argue whether the Norse settlers were wiped out by climate change, the Little Ice Age, very unfriendly, or if they simply gave up and returned to Iceland quietly, ashamed of their frostbitten failure. Either way, you wouldn't want to be there when it happened, because not only are you freezing and hungry, but the local Inuit populations aren't thrilled about your presence. And though there were some moments of trade and contact, things could get tense fast, especially when you try to explain why you're using walrus ivory to pay tithes to a bishop 2,000 miles away. Oh yes, there's a bishop here. Well, a cathedral at least. They built one out of imported stone. Of course, right in the middle of the settlement. It's lovely and completely impractical. In winter, services must have sounded like Gregorian chanting through chattering teeth. Let's not forget the Norse brought their whole legal system with them. You break a rule, you go to the thing, the local assembly, to stand trial. Problem is, in a place with 30 people and no prison, your sentence is either banishment into the cold, or death also. Into the cold. No middle ground. There's also this gem in order to warm their homes. They burned livestock dung? That's right. Frozen cow patties. set ablaze. The scent imagines smoky beef with hints of failure and regret. Still, the Norse clung on for about 500 years. You can't say they weren't persistent. Archaeologists found combs, chess pieces, and little sewing needles, suggesting that people still groomed, played games, and mended clothes even as their world slowly iced over. Hope dies hard when you're Viking, but if you're imagining huddling in some cozy longhouse wrapped in furs, just know everything leaks. The wind finds cracks. The snow drifts inside, and someone's always coughing in the corner. Probably from scurvy, which you're also getting. Hope you like bleeding gums. And in winter, the darkness stretches for months. No sunrises, just endless twilight, howling winds, and stories about trolls in the hills that definitely sound less fictional when you haven't seen daylight in 3 weeks. The fringe detail. Some Norse settlers tried raising falcons to sell in Europe, yes, even here. Noble lords in France apparently loved hunting birds from the Arctic. How that business plan fared about as well as the cows. So you, dear traveler, bundle up in your scratchy wool cloak, chew on a slab of frozen seal fat, and try to remember what grass felt like. Tomorrow, you'll check the shore again, just in case a ship came. It won't have, but it's either that or you listen to Uncle Bjorn talk about his lost toes for the 100th time. Still want that Lost Actually van life Viking aesthetic? Yeah. Didn't think so. You don't think things can get worse than eating frozen seal fat in a house made of cow poop until you take a wrong turn and end up in medieval London? Welcome to the city where ambition meets ankle-deep sludge. If Norse Greenland froze your hope, London just stomps on it with a plague-ridden boot. You arrive in the 14th century, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight of bustling trade or the chatter of market stalls, it's the smell. A putrid cocktail of rotting fish, horse manure, unwashed bodies, and something you can only describe as spiritually aggressive cheese. It's not just bad, it's historically bad. The streets are narrow, damp, and alive in the worst way. Open sewers run right down the middle, casually known as kennels. And no, not the kind with puppies. Londoners toss chamber pot contents straight from their windows with the polite yell of Gardy-loo, which is Frenchish for heads up, poop incoming. Your boots sink into something soft. You don't want to know what you really don't. A rat scurries past, then another, then about 14 more. You're outnumbered, and they know it. At this time, London's population is surging past 50,000. That may not sound like much to your modern city dweller ears. But imagine cramming those people into a city built for half that, with no sanitation, no waste collection, and no idea that germs exist. You're walking around in the medical equivalent of a shared fork at a sneeze buffet, and yet, somehow, people thrive or at least survive. The River Thames is the lifeblood of trade and disease. Boats unload goods and passengers alike, and if you're lucky, a barrel of spoiled wine or moldy French cheese. You pick your way past fishmongers, blacksmiths, street preachers, and pickpockets. The mainstream historical fact here, the Great Plague of 1348 to 1350, killed nearly half of London's population. 1 in every 2 people, just gone. Historians still argue whether the disease spread more rapidly due to rats or the fleas on rats, or whether poor hygiene alone was enough to keep the death wheel spinning. Honestly, probably a team effort. The Black Death doesn't discriminate, rich or poor. You start getting those telltale buboes black swellings that feel like God is personally rooting for your demise and you're done for. The dead pile up so fast, mass graves become a regular civic activity. St. Mary's Spitalfield alone is estimated to hold tens of thousands of remains from just a few plague waves. People even buried loved ones in backyards, under taverns, anywhere. Oh, and the riverside. It's also where you'll find the public executions. Because when the city isn't dying of disease, it's enthusiastically beheading people. Heretics, thieves, traitors, pick your title. There's probably a special gallows for it. Now, let's talk bread. Sounds harmless, right? Not in medieval London. If the miller cheats you on flour, if the baker adds chalk to the dough, and they did, you could die from your breakfast. The assize of bread and ale was actually a set of laws regulating the price and quality of bread, and they had bread inspectors. Imagine the job satisfaction there. Today I got paid to sniff wheat and yell at a guy for rat hair in a baguette. But if you're poor and you're not buying bread at a stall. You're begging for crusts, scrounging from gutters, or nibbling on some dried peas you stole from the back of a cart. Dinner's a maybe. Bathing is a myth. Soap is optional. And if you think, but the church will take care of me, think again. The monasteries are busy with their own problems, and the clergy isn't immune to plague either. Besides, they'll mostly just tell you this is all a punishment for your sins. Very helpful. Thanks. Here's your quirky tidbit. One of the city's public toilets, or privies, sat directly above the Walbrook stream. It served as a sort of early flushing system until the stream got clogged and the waste backed up into nearby cellars. There's a historical note from a merchant complaining his wine cellar smelled of Satan's breath. I mean, fair? Fire's always a threat, too. Thatched roofs, open flames, and a complete lack of firefighting infrastructure mean that one bad cooking day can level your whole block. And don't expect anyone to help. The best you'll get is someone yelling fire while grabbing whatever they own that isn't currently ablaze. And the worst part. This is one of the better places in England if you want work. Sure, it's gross. Sure, it's diseased, but it has jobs, markets, guilds, and the occasional surviving chicken. You could always move to the countryside if you like starvation and tax collection by sword. So you, the wanderer, huddle into a dingy alley, your cloak soaked through with something that definitely isn't just rain. A toothless vendor offers you an eel pie, and you eat it, mostly out of spite. It's lukewarm, gelatinous, and oddly crunchy. You try not to ask why. And somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, another soul claimed by the city's relentless appetite. Still dreaming of medieval London like it's a Tudor fairy tale, keep dreaming. Just keep your mouth closed when it rains. Trust me, you'd think after plague-drenched London, things could only look up. But then you shuffle east, squinting through low-hanging fog, and step into the murky peat bog villages of the medieval Low Countries, modern-day Netherlands and parts of Belgium. Welcome to the land of eternal dampness, sink-in houses, and what might be the soggiest lifestyle in human history. From a distance, the setting almost looks charming. Green fields, misty canals, quaint cottages like an early oil painting that smells faintly of mildew. But once you step foot into the actual village, the mud swallows your boot with an audible slurp. Congratulations. You now live in nature's wet sponge. These settlements, often perched on reclaimed land, are built on peat, not solid ground, not rocks, peat. It's decomposed plant goo. You build a house on it, and 10 years later, your house is suddenly a basement. You wake up one morning and your floorboards are underwater. Again, to fight this, medieval villagers invented some clever ways of elevating the land, piling up more peat, digging canals to drain water, even building mounds called terps to live on. Still, your cow might slowly sink into the earth if you're not watching. True story. One mainstream historical fact here is that large parts of the Netherlands owe their shape to these medieval efforts. People literally re-engineered nature with spades, buckets, and stubbornness. The result? A constant battle to keep dry, like living inside a giant colander. And while they were trying to drain their land, they were also burning it. Yes, burning peat as fuel, which dries out the land even more, causing it to sink faster. Historians still argue whether this self-sabotaging cycle was a misunderstanding of the environment or simply a desperate trade-off to survive. Probably both. It rains all the time. Your clothes are never dry. Your bread is never dry. Even your thoughts feel damp. And don't expect to warm up by a roaring hearth. Your fireplace smokes like a dragon with sinus issues. And the peat fire smells like stewed moss and regret. Quirky fact. One medieval low country village had its own annual festival for scraping out the canals. People waded in waist deep, scooping muck, laughing, and occasionally finding lost shoes, tools, or bodies. It was civic duty meets community bath. Farming here is an act of bold optimism. You plant barley, only to find it growing sideways due to wind. You try raising sheep, and they develop trench hoof. Insects thrive, you less so. Then there's the flooding. Coastal storms crash in from the North Sea like they have a grudge. Entire villages are wiped off maps. One of the worst disasters. The St. Lucia flood of 1287 killed over 50,000 people. That's more than London's Black Death toll. Most of them drowned in their own fields. But even in the face of this soggy doom, people endure. Why? Because bogs are weirdly rich. Peat can be sold. Fishing is decent. And the land is flat perfect for transport if you can stop it from becoming a lake every other Tuesday. You might have to pull your cart through a foot of muck. But hey, no mountains to climb. Your village is tightly packed, with long, low houses, thatched roofs, and walls made of wattle and daub, basically sticks and mud. The medieval version of papier-mâché. Chickens wander freely. Children do too. Barefoot in all seasons because shoes are a luxury you gave up on after the second pair melted in the swamp. And when you do get to eat, the meal is okay. Potatoes haven't arrived yet from the New World, so you're stuck with beans, turnips, rye bread, and eel. Always with the eel. Fried eel. Smoked eel. Mystery stew that you hope is eel. Spoiler, sometimes it's not. The towns here aren't lawless, but they're tense. Local lords tax you for land you built with your own hands. And if you complain, they just point to a soggy scroll and say, custom. Justice is meted out in duckweed-covered courtyards, often involving fines you'll never afford or time in the stocks where your neighbors get to throw wet things at you. And don't forget the pests. Fleas. Gnats. Mosquitoes so large they have their own opinions. You fall asleep under a wool blanket only to wake up with 34 bites and a new personal vendetta against nature. Sometimes you look up and see monks trudging past, heading to abbeys that are only slightly less damp than your own home. They chant, carry baskets of bread, and probably smell faintly of holy mold. The church is your only reliable shelter if you're willing to sit through an hour of Latin sermons you don't understand, shouted by a guy with a sinus cold. But hey, there's a fringe bright spot. Peat bogs preserve things. Really well. That means the occasional corpse perfectly intact rises to the surface during harvest. Oh, look, it's old Garrett. Didn't we bury him last century? Even more awkward, some of them might not have been buried on purpose. Scholars debate whether certain bog bodies were executions, sacrifices, or really unfortunate drunks who wandered off. So you dry your socks over a peat fire, sip something pretending to be beer, and try not to fall into the ditch next to your house. Because in this village, the ground is never truly solid, and neither is your sense of comfort. Sleep tight, just don't roll over too far. That might be the edge of the floor. You squint into the horizon and watch the mud recede into dunes. The air dries, the breeze thickens with grit. Welcome to the sun-baked outpost on the edge of the Sahara lonely frontier forts, where you're not just fighting raiders. You're fighting boredom, dust, and your own steadily evaporating will to live. Imagine waking up on a splintery wooden cot with a mouthful of sand and the scent of camel dung wafting through your window, which, by the way, is just a hole in the wall with a ratty cloth over it. The desert heat slaps you across the face before you're even vertical. And surprise, it's only 6 a.m. These forts, scattered along medieval Saharan trade routes like those in the kingdom of Mali or deep Berber territory, were crucial for guarding caravans transporting gold, salt, and sometimes enslaved people between West Africa and the Mediterranean world. Important. Absolutely. Comfortable, not even remotely. Your main job here, staring at the horizon, you're one of a handful of guards posted at a remote way station. The rest of the world might be arguing about kings, popes, and heresies. But here, your biggest drama is whether someone finally cracked the water jar or if the goats are missing again. The salt trade is your lifeline. Massive camel caravans, some stretching for miles, carry slabs of salt harvested from dry riverbeds like Tahaza. Historians still argue whether salt was more valuable than gold in this region, and honestly, standing under the sun with your tongue glued to the roof of your mouth, you might pick salt too. The forts themselves, think less castle and more baked mud with attitude, crumbling walls, flat roofs, and just enough structural integrity to avoid collapsing during the weekly windstorm. You're always sweeping sand out of corners, even though you know it'll be back in 5 minutes. Sand is your roommate now. And the wind, oh, the wind. It doesn't howl. It whispers menacingly. It carries secrets, stings your eyes, fills your clothes, and sometimes exfoliates your entire personality. You cover your face with a cloth, not because it looks cool, but because one open-mouthed gasp during a gust, and you'll be chewing grit for days. Your meal's flatbread so dry it could be used as roofing material. A few dates, maybe a handful of millet porridge if you're lucky. Meat rare, vegetables, exotic myth. Water carefully rationed, precious, and warm enough to make you question your life choices. You watch the caravan arrive slow, rhythmic, and majestic from a distance. Up close, camels farting in sync, drivers squabbling, and crates of salt that weigh more than you. You help unload, swatting flies and trying to not get in the way. The traders bring stories from distant lands, but after they leave, the silence returns louder than before. Your quirky tidbit here. Some traders believed jinns, the desert spirits, haunted certain dunes. If a camel went missing, or a man walked into the night and didn't return, it wasn't dehydration or getting lost. Nope. It was the jinn, which, to be fair, is more comforting than Steve got lost and exploded from heat exhaustion. The days blur. You wake, eat, check the watchtower, it's still empty, and fall asleep under a sky so full of stars it almost makes up for the fact that your socks have turned to sandpaper. Almost at night, the desert cools just enough to remind you that, yes, you still have nerve endings. You curl up under a wool blanket, whisper a prayer to the void, and try to ignore the jackal cries. Or worse, the sound of wind whistling through the broken slats above your bunk. Like the desert itself is breathing. One historical fact, some of these remote forts, like those on the trans-Saharan route between Timbuktu and Sijil Massa, were not just military stations, they were mini-cities for scholars, traders, and clerics. Imagine hauling a library through a sandstorm. Now imagine someone dropping it because a camel saw a snake. But not all forts are that sophisticated. Some are just checkpoints, a few walls, a water trough, a watchtower built with more optimism than stone. You might serve here for months, even years, and never see combat. Just the slow decay of tools, the steady erosion of morale, and one guy in your squad who insists he saw something glowing in the dunes. Every night, occasionally, bandits test the perimeter. Not full assaults, more like poke and run tactics. You chase shadows, waste arrows, and hope someone remembered to repair the gate this week. It usually ends with a whole lot of yelling and no actual raiders. And then there's the paperwork. Yes, even here. Some poor soul has to keep inventory of how many crates of salt passed through, how many water skins were doled out, and whether or not Corporal Umar broke another spearhead trying to open dates with it. At least once a month, someone declares they've had enough and tries to walk home. Most don't make it. One guy tied palm leaves to his feet, thinking they'd catch the wind. They didn't. He did not return. You, though, stay. Mostly because there's nowhere else to go. You've adjusted. You wrap your turban with practiced hands, sip warm water with the solemnity of a monk, and draw pictures in the dust with your toe. Some of them are quite good. One even looks like a goat. And when the sun sinks below the dunes in a blaze of orange and crimson, you climb to the roof, stare out into the horizon, and wonder how long before the next caravan arrives. Or if it ever will. Because out here, time stretches like the desert in boredom. Not battle is the real enemy. The heat fades, but the air doesn't get any fresher. You're somewhere in the Carpathians now, hiking through pine forest where the mist hangs thick and low like it's trying to hide something. And honestly, it probably is. Welcome to medieval Transylvania, a place where the landscape is beautiful, the mountains are steep, and the people are terrified. You've arrived during one of history's greatest PR disasters, the vampire panic. Yes, that Transylvania. But don't let Hollywood fool you. There's not a single suave count here. Just peasant paranoia, grave digging, and more garlic than a pizza shop's basement. You pass a cluster of cottages with wooden crosses nailed over the doors and herbs dangling from every beam like botanical wind chimes. The villagers avoid your eyes. They whisper. And you definitely don't want to ask about the freshly turned graves on the hillside. See, life here is already hard. The winters are long and cruel. The soil is rocky, and you're constantly worried that your neighbor might be a tax collector in disguise. You farm rye, herd sheep, and try not to annoy the local noble who owns everything, including technically your teeth. But then someone dies. Not unusual disease, exposure, or wolves do the trick. But a week later, a cousin claims she saw the dead man wandering near the forest. Then another neighbor says the cows are refusing to produce milk, and 3 kids come down with mystery fevers. The village starts murmuring. Soon enough, there's a midnight meeting behind the chapel, a rusty spade, and a very unfortunate exhumation. Mainstream historians will tell you this stuff really happened across parts of Eastern Europe from the 12th century onward. Villagers fearing that the dead could return to drain life from the living, exhumed corpses examined them for signs of unnatural freshness and took preventative measures. We're talking stakings, heart removals, decapitations, and in some cases, burning the body to ash, just in case. The scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these rituals stemmed purely from folklore or whether they were social control mechanisms for dealing with unexplained death and illness. Could be spiritual hysteria, could be an early form of community-led forensic science, or just a really bad coping strategy. But what does that mean for you, the average medieval villager? It means you live in constant, low-level dread. That fever your son has, it might not be just bad soup. It might be the spirit of cousin Andre, annoyed you didn't leave a candle at his grave. So you head out with a sickle and some garlic garlands, and you hope for the best. Garlic, by the way, is everywhere. Worn around necks, stuffed in keyholes, rubbed on doorposts. You stink like an over-seasoned roast, but no one's judging. You're not trying to win friends. You're trying not to get spiritually drained in your sleep. The quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed that if a person died with their mouth open, they were more likely to become a vampire. So you get the very grim task of prying Aunt Lydia's jaw shut before rigor mortis sets in. Good luck sleeping after that. You also keep an eye out for suspicious animals. Black dogs, owls, bats, bad omens. One flaps too close to your chimney and suddenly the whole village is preparing a special anti-vampire ritual involving incense, salt circles, and digging up Old Man Petru. Again, day-to-day life isn't much easier. Your home is a wooden cabin with no insulation, a smoky hearth, and a ceiling so low you have to duck every time you stand. In winter, you stuff straw between the logs to keep the cold out and the rats in. Meals are simple porridge, cabbage, sometimes cheese, and a bit of pork fat if you're celebrating. You dream of spices, but settle for onions. Your biggest asset a cow? Your second biggest the ability to pretend you're not afraid. Because fear, they say, feeds the undead. There's a priest in town, but he mostly drinks and tells people to pray harder. And the local lord he hasn't visited in 5 years. His steward collects grain and coins, then disappears back into the castle, an ominous silhouette on the cliffs, often lit up by lightning, because of course it is. One traveler once claimed to see floating lights above a grave mound. Another claimed to hear whispers in a language no one recognized. A merchant from Wallachia passed through and warned the villagers about a forest spirit that drinks blood. He was politely but firmly escorted out of town. In a world with no science and too much imagination, you create stories to explain the unexplained. And in Transylvania, those stories grow fangs. You don't ask too many questions. You light a candle, whisper a prayer, and keep a sharp stick near your bed just in case. Night falls fast here. The trees cast long shadows, and the mist creeps in like it owns the place. You lie under a wool blanket, listening to distant howls, trying not to imagine who or what might be prowling outside. Maybe it's just wolves. Maybe it's just wind. Or maybe it's the neighbor you buried last Thursday. You close your eyes, the scent of garlic thick in your nose, and hope tomorrow dawns bright, or at least undead free. Sleep well, and maybe leave the window closed tonight. You rub the vampire lore from your eyes and find yourself somewhere even quieter, eerily so. Welcome to Western Ireland, where the hills roll green and the air is heavy with the sound of absolutely nothing. That's because you've found your way to a moldy stone monastery, one of the many scattered like lichen across the Irish coast. If you were hoping for a warm fire and friendly monks, think again. This is the medieval monastic life damp, silent, and spiritually exhausting. It's early morning, though you wouldn't know it from the dark cloud cover that hasn't moved since the Norman invasion. Your robes are coarse and itchy, your feet are bare, and your only breakfast is a bowl of cold oat porridge that somehow manages to taste both bland and sour. It's a culinary achievement in sadness. The monastery is built from rough stone stacked by hand, of course, and sits on the edge of a cliff. Great for scenic brooding. Less great when the wind whips in from the Atlantic, carrying sea spray, bird droppings, and the occasional gust strong enough to relocate your prayer mat. Everything smells faintly of moss and regret. This monastery follows a strict version of the rule of Saint Benedict. That means silence, obedience, work, and prayer repeated about a dozen times a day. You wake before sunrise, chant psalms, copy scripture, tend to goats, and maybe, if you're lucky, scrub something really filthy. It's like a spiritual boot camp, minus the yelling. Unless Brother Seamus trips over a sheep again. The mainstream historical fact Ireland's monasteries were renowned centers of learning during the early medieval period. They preserved classical texts, developed beautiful illuminated manuscripts, and served as rare bastions of literacy in a world mostly run on superstition and shouting. Places like Clonmacnoise and Skellig Michael are still iconic ruins today. But living in one not quite as romantic as the travel brochures suggest. For starters, there's the weather. Cold, wet, unpredictable. You step outside and the sky immediately mists on you like a passive-aggressive roommate. Your cloak is never dry. Your sandals squish. And don't even ask about the latrine situation. It's a short walk to a long drop with no roof, no door, and way too much exposure to seagull judgment. Mealtimes are quiet, as in completely silent. You're not allowed to speak. Want more bread? Too bad you can't ask. One monk occasionally holds up little signs like "Pass the salt" or "Brother Aidan is chewing too loudly." This counts as high drama. The food is as simple as the lifestyle barley bread, boiled greens, fish if the sea gods are generous, and butter on feast days. You crave excitement, But the most scandalous thing that's happened this week is someone misplacing a quill. Thrilling stuff. And speaking of quills, if you're a scribe, congratulations. You'll be hunched over a desk for 12 hours a day in a cold stone room, scraping Latin onto vellum by candlelight. Your fingers are cramped, your eyes are strained, and the ink is made from oak galls, which smells like sour wine and disappointment. The quirky tidbit: some monks practiced anchoritism. They sealed themselves into tiny cells or stone huts, sometime with only a window for food. Voluntarily, because nothing says spiritual devotion like spending your life in a damp, glorified birdhouse. One of the monks here does speak, but only once a week and only in riddles. The others claim he's wise. You suspect he's just bored out of his gourd. His latest gem: the sheep knows the cliff by its absence. You're not sure if that's theology or a weather forecast. At night, the wind howls through the monastery's cracks, rattling shutters and extinguishing candles. The stone walls retain cold like a grudge. You wrap yourself in wool, lie on a straw mat, and try not to think about how long it's been since you felt warm or entertained. Historians still argue whether this monastic rigor was a noble spiritual ideal or a form of institutionalized self-punishment wrapped in a cassock. Maybe both. Maybe a little too much find God by suffering and not enough find God by warm soup. And don't think about trying to leave. Chatty, that's not really a thing. Once you're committed, you're here for life or until the next Viking raid. Because yes, even here, you're not safe. Raiders love a good monastery. All that silver, no real defenses. You hear rumors of longships landing further up the coast, and suddenly everyone's praying extra hard, just in case. Once, a scribe drew a tiny doodle of a dragon in the margin of a manuscript. It caused an uproar. Half the monks wanted it removed. The other half claimed it was symbolic. You just wish they'd doodle more anything to break up the relentless monotony of ink, prayer, and root vegetables. You pass your time tending the garden, murmuring psalms and trying not to trip over chickens. You've memorized the Psalter backwards. You've named the clouds. You've woven moss into shapes for amusement. You're either on the edge of enlightenment or slowly losing it. The line is very thin, and yet there's something oddly peaceful about it. The sea crashes below. The wind sings through the chapel tower. The stars blaze above like ancient script. You feel small, but in a poetic, slightly moldy way. Still, if you're dreaming of medieval Ireland as a place of cozy hearths and jolly bards, remember this: you're far more likely to spend your days in silence, soaking wet, surrounded by sheep, and debating the theological implications of lentils. You fall asleep to the sound of dripping rain, a distant bell, and Brother Seamus quietly snoring through his beard. And maybe, just maybe, you dream of something other than cabbage. You wake up sneezing not because you're cold, but because something just scurried past your nose. Your bed is a crate, your pillow is your cloak, and the stench around you is so thick it could probably qualify for its own guild membership. Welcome to Genoa's disease-soaked docks in the 14th century, where the air hums with commerce, curses, and the occasional bubonic cough. Genoa is booming, one of the key maritime powers of the medieval Mediterranean. It's a glittering port of wealth, politics, and power if you look at it from a safe distance. But up close, especially down at the harbor, it's more rat palace than Renaissance. You're not a noble. You're not a merchant prince, you're a docker or worse, a runner between warehouses. That means you're hauling heavy crates of grain, spices, wool, or silk. And sometimes something a little more fatal, because Genoa isn't just a trade hub, it's a plague pipeline. Mainstream historical fact time, Genoa played a major role in bringing the Black Death to Europe. In 1347, a Genoese ship fleeing the siege of Kaffa in modern day Crimea returned home carrying, well, not just spices, infected crew, infected rats, and plenty of infected fleas. The plague spread from the port like wine from a cracked barrel. Historians still argue whether it was Genoa, Venice, or Messina that deserves the plague entry point gold medal, but Genoa was definitely on the podium. As a lowly dock worker, you're right there on the front lines with no idea what's actually killing everyone. You just know people start coughing, swelling, and dying. And quickly. But even without the plague, Genoa's docks are filthy. You're knee-deep in fish guts, mud, and the kind of waste no one bothers to shovel. The sewers are more suggestions than systems. Dead animals float in the harbor like lazy little omens, and you're pretty sure that slick sheen on the water isn't natural. The quirky tidbit Genoa's warehouse district had entire buildings called loggia used just for quarantining goods, and eventually they'd lock you in for 40 days, 40 giorni if you showed symptoms. No medicine, just time, fear, and bad soup. Even when healthy, you live like cargo. 10 to a room, straw on the floor, and one chamber pot you all pretend someone else will clean. You wake up sore, you go to sleep sore, and if you're lucky, your boots don't sprout fungus. The food is technically edible. Harbor stew, stale bread, maybe some lentils if the ships are on time, and fish. So much fish. You've eaten it grilled, pickled, dried, raw, salted, and boiled until it has the texture of wet rope. You no longer ask what's in the stew. If it floats and doesn't hiss, you eat it. If you think church will offer peace, think again. The local clergy are overwhelmed. Bells toll constantly for the dead. Processions wind through the city daily, waving incense and muttering prayers. You try to pray along, but you're distracted by the choir boy who clearly has a fever and maybe just coughed on the communion chalice. Genoa's narrow streets twist like intestines. They're so tight, you could high-five a neighbor just by sticking out your elbow. Laundry drips from windows. Cats yowl from rooftops. Someone's always yelling in Ligurian dialect. The city never quite sleeps, though you wish you could, without fleas crawling into your ears. The port authorities are corrupt. You try to bribe a guard to let your cousin onto a plague ship so he can go sell onions in Sardinia. The guard shrugs and says, "Only if he brings me back wine." You're not even surprised, you're just impressed by the specificity. And yes, wine flows here cheap, strong, and always slightly vinegary. You drink it anyway. It dulls the taste of everything else. A merchant offers you a healing tonic for a few copper coins. It smells like garlic and regret. You buy it. What's the worst that could happen? One fringe belief floating around? That the plague is carried by bad air called miasma. So people stuff herbs up their noses or wear pomanders on belts. You try it with dried orange peels and rosemary and it doesn't work. But at least you smell like an ambitious salad. Your lungs ache, your legs hurt, and someone keeps playing a lute in the alleyway at 3 a.m. You think about leaving heading inland. Maybe. But then you remember Genoa might be a cesspool. but at least there's work here. Back home, you'd just be starving in silence. So you stay, you load another crate, you dodge another rat, you ignore the itching bump on your leg. Definitely not a flea bite. Probably just a splinter, probably. At night, you sit on a barrel overlooking the sea. The ships rock gently, lanterns glowing. The stars shine above the city's broken walls. The salt wind ruffles your hair, and for a fleeting moment, it almost feels beautiful. Someone vomits in the water behind you. Welcome to Genoa. You wipe the brine of Genoa from your face and take a step east straight into a furnace. The air changes from salty to smoky. The wind carries the tang of hot iron and something more sinister soot. Sweat. And is that charred wood? Welcome to the slums of medieval Constantinople, the glittering Byzantine capital where, if you're poor, you're one kitchen fire away from total annihilation. Constantinople, jewel of the East, crossroads of empire and piety, was famous for its palaces, its mosaics, and the Hagia Sophia's stunning dome. But you don't live there. You live in a wooden tenement with your aunt, 3 cousins, a goat, and a mysterious draft that whispers run every time the neighbor lights his stove. The city is crowded, insanely so. A Byzantine block isn't so much a residential area as it is a human puzzle box building stacked on buildings. Narrow alleyways that feel like breathing corridors. Staircases leading to nowhere, and bridges made of scavenged wood. It's like someone tried to invent vertical poverty. You sleep in a loft that used to be a pigeon coop. Your ceiling is a tarp, your blanket is shared, and your privacy level is somewhere between public square and communal sponge. You hear your neighbor's every argument and bowel movement. One mainstream historical fact. Constantinople had frequent fires, devastating ones. In fact, whole districts burned to the ground repeatedly. Historians still argue whether it was poor urban planning, political arson, or just a really passionate cooking scene. The buildings were mostly timber and stacked tight. Once one caught fire, the whole block went up like a bonfire made of matchsticks and hopes. You try to sleep at night, but someone's always shouting fire, sometimes because of actual flames, sometimes just because a kid wanted to clear the street for fun. It's like a city-wide anxiety disorder. Byzantine law even tried to stop this. Buildings were supposed to be spaced out. Fire brigades were established, and regulations written. But no one enforced them unless someone noble complained. Spoiler. No one noble lives in your district. The quirky tidbit. Some homes were connected by overhead walkways, so people didn't have to go down to the street level, which was usually clogged with carts, livestock, market stalls, and petty thieves. So, yes, at any moment, someone could fall on you, or throw something worse. You're a laborer by day. You haul water from the cisterns, work in a dye shop, or unload olive oil from ships at the Golden Horn. You go home slick with grime, and the communal wash basin smells like pickled cabbage and wet rope. Food street vendors hawk sesame bread, grilled fish, and mystery meat. You eat standing up, balancing a cracked bowl on your knee. There's a rumor going around that a fish vendor is secretly using seagull. You eat it anyway. Hunger is a powerful negotiator. The water isn't safe to drink unless it's boiled. But you drink it anyway. You're thirsty. You regret it later. And then there's the riots. Constantinople is famous for them. Factions like the Blues and Greens, supposedly sports teams often escalate from enthusiastic cheering to burn down the city. You once watched a bakery catch fire during a riot about chariot races. It was one of your better days. You keep a packed satchel near your sleeping spot just in case. It holds a cracked ceramic bowl, your second best sandals, and a single gold coin that may or may not be chocolate. You're not checking. Hope is delicious. Byzantine politics trickle down like hot wax slowly, painfully, and with no real concern for you. You hear rumors of court intrigue, of eunuchs running things behind silk curtains, of generals who get blinded one week and promoted the next. It's all theater to you. Your stage is the street, and the drama is much louder. Every day, you walk past monuments and mosaics most people would travel continents to see. You barely notice them anymore. That gold-tiled wall in the church, just where you lean while waiting for figs. The massive aqueduct, a pigeon latrine. Beauty is normal here, so normal it stops being beautiful. There's a neighbor who claims he once saw the emperor gliding past in a litter surrounded by chanting monks and soldiers. You believe him, mostly because he has a burn mark shaped like a coin on his palm, supposedly from touching a cursed relic, or just falling asleep too close to a lantern. Historians and his mother still argue. On holy days, the city fills with processions, incense, bells, and candlelight. You join the crowd, half in awe, half just hoping for free bread. The church is grand, yes, but the soup line behind it is where the real miracles happen. Your walls are thin. So thin, in fact, that you often know what your neighbors are eating before you do. Conversations, sneezes, arguments with the goat, you hear it all. You know more about the next door couple's marital issues than they do. You have opinions, but you stay quiet. The smell of smoke makes you jump. Always, it's in your nostrils. Your hair, your dreams. You've seen too many homes collapse. You've helped dig through cinders for valuables. You once found an intact spoon and kept it like a trophy. Night falls. You climb your ladder bed. Listen to the lullaby of creaking wood and distant shouts, and pray that tonight isn't the night the bakery 2 buildings over finally combusts. Again. And if it does, you know the route. You've done it before. Grab the satchel. Yell fire to warn others. Then run toward the sea. Toward the cool breeze and the hope that someone else's district takes the heat this time. Because in Constantinople, it's not a matter of if your block burns, it's just when. You barely escaped the smoky alleyways of Constantinople. But now you're coughing for a different reason. Not from fire, but from stone dust and coal soot. You found yourself in Silesia, the mountainous region straddling parts of modern-day Poland and Czechia. It's the 13th century, and you've just taken the worst possible job you could get without being on fire mining. From the outside, the village seems peaceful enough. Hills roll softly under patches of forest. Cows moo in the distance, and little houses sit beside muddy paths. But dig a little deeper, literally, and you'll find yourself in one of the grimmest workplaces in medieval Europe. Welcome to the belly of the earth, where every breath feels like it has teeth. You shuffle down into the mine shaft, candle stubs tied to your cap with twine. Your tunic is already streaked with grime, and your hands are raw from gripping tools. Miners like you work long hours, deep underground, hacking into veins of silver, lead, and salt with nothing but picks, hammers, and pure stubbornness, and hope. Mostly hope that the ceiling doesn't decide to introduce itself unexpectedly. Silesian mines boomed during this era, particularly around towns like Tarnowski Gori and Olkush, feeding the economic needs of kings and coin makers. Silver was precious. So was salt. But you're not getting rich. You're getting hunched. Coffee, and occasionally crushed. One mainstream historical fact in the 13th century: rulers like Henrik the Bearded of Silesia offered incentives to German miners to develop the region. That meant an influx of skilled laborers, more mining settlements, and more accidents. Lots more. Historians still argue whether mining operations in medieval Central Europe were truly sustainable, or whether they rapidly drained local resources before moving on. Judging by the growing number of abandoned shafts around here, you have your suspicions. You descend into the mine, and the temperature shifts from brisk to muggy cave sweat. The air is thick, damp, and cloying. Ventilation. There are shafts, but they mostly vent desperation. You're supposed to whistle while you work, not to pass time, but to prove you're still breathing. If it goes quiet, someone starts digging. Fast. Your quirky tidbit canary birds weren't medieval, those came later. In this period, miners relied on candles and smell. If the flame went out or your nose started burning, it was time to run. Or, more often, too late. The tools are crude wooden beams for supports, iron picks, and buckets on ropes. Ladders made from knotted branches. Every creak is a warning. You lose your sense of time down here. There's no sun. Only the soft hiss of sweat hitting hot rock. Water drips everywhere. It pools in corners, it seeps down your neck. Sometimes it's harmless. Sometimes it's laced with metals that give your skin a charming greenish tinge. Everyone looks vaguely ill, and most of the older miners have what people call the stone lung. You don't live long enough for gray hair in this profession. If you hit 40, people assume you made a deal with the devil. And yes, there are devil stories. Miners whisper about underground spirits called kobolds. Sometimes friendly, sometimes spiteful, if your tools vanish or your candle snuffs for no reason. Someone blames a kobold. You do too. Because otherwise it means you're just very unlucky. And no one wants that kind of math in a mine. Above ground, your home is basic. A one-room hut shared with your family, a goat, and an endless supply of mining gear you can't afford to replace. Your boots are stiff with mud. Your back is curved from hauling sacks of ore. You eat thick bread, cabbage stew, and salted meat if your neighbor's pig had a bad week. The village priest blesses you once a month. He stands at the mine entrance, waves a cross, mutters something holy, then promptly leaves. He's not going down there. He's seen what comes back up, and what doesn't. Sometimes the mine floods. Sometimes it collapses. Sometimes someone lights a candle too close to a gas pocket, and the tunnel explodes like a demonic birthday cake. You survive by being careful, lucky, and not standing under creaking support beams. There's no medical care to speak of. If you break a leg, you're done. They send a child to fill your spot. He's 8, he says hello, then falls asleep holding a pickaxe. Welcome to the team. If you're injured but breathing, the local healer applies a salve made of pig fat, ash, and herbs. You're fairly certain one of those herbs is just moss. Then you're expected to get back to work within the week. Unless you die, in which case someone else gets your job. And your bucket. Mining is loud picks striking rock, carts rumbling, voices echoing like ghosts. But it's also oddly quiet in another way. No singing, no laughter, just focus. Survival depends on it. The moment someone starts telling a story or humming a tune, something bad happens. So you keep your head down, you chip, you haul, you ache. At night, your joints throb, your hair smells of metal and soot. You hear the groans of other miners through the thin walls, and you all share the same dream in early spring, a lucky strike, or a freak accident that leaves you rich and semi-retired in a town with actual bread. But mostly, you dream of the sun, of warm wind and green grass and lungs that don't feel like they're full of powdered rock. You turn over on your straw mat, trying to ignore the creaking in your knees. Tomorrow's another shift, another candle, another chance that the mountain decides it's had enough of you. Sleep well, but don't get too comfortable. The mine waits. You blink away the coal dust and surface into a different kind of cold one that cuts through your clothes, into your lungs, and straight to your soul. You're now deep in the forested vastness of Rus, under the heavy hand of Mongol rule. It's the 13th century, and the steppe has never felt so endless or so dangerous. Your village is small. A dozen wooden huts huddle together like they're afraid of being noticed. And rightly so. This is not just winter. This is Russ's winter, the kind where trees crack in the cold and your breath freezes in midair. You pull your fur-lined hood tighter, but it's no use. The wind finds everything. Life here isn't flashy. You farm when the land isn't frozen, trap when animals are foolish enough to wander near, and spend most of the year chopping wood so you can almost not die in February. Your house is a squat log cabin with gaps stuffed full of moss and straw. The roof leaks, the walls groan, and there's always a squirrel in the attic you can't catch. There's no local lord anymore. Not really. Since the Mongol invasion, your area pays tribute directly to the Golden Horde. One mainstream historical fact. After 1240, when the Mongols sacked Kiev, vast swaths of Eastern Europe, including Russia, came under Mongol control indirectly, through heavy taxation and military threat. They didn't occupy every village. They didn't need to. Fear did the work. Historians still argue whether Mongol rule crushed Russ's development or unintentionally helped centralize power by forcing the fractured principalities to get their act together. But when you're a peasant in a wooden house with a leaky roof and a tax agent approaching on horseback, you're not thinking big picture. You're thinking, please don't take the goat. Once a year, twice if you're unlucky, tribute collectors arrive. Horsemen wrapped in leather and fur, armed and silent. They don't speak much. They don't need to. They point. They demand. And if they don't get what they want, someone gets dragged off. No trial, no discussion, just a sudden vacancy at dinner. You pay in grain, fur, and livestock. Sometimes silver if your village pooled enough. More often, you give up a good portion of your winter stockpile and pray the next harvest doesn't fail. You can go hungry. Your kids can't. Your quirky tidbit. Some villages buried valuables under the floorboards and trained toddlers to keep quiet when soldiers arrived. Not exactly inspiring, but survival has never been cute. Food is simple. Rye bread when you have flour. Stew made from root vegetables and whatever you hunted, trapped, or found frozen and vaguely edible. You're not picky. Your most prized possession is a kettle that doesn't leak. You sleep beside it. And there's the wolves. Always the wolves. You hear them at night howling just beyond the tree line, waiting for someone to forget to lock the goat shed. They're not mystical here. They're just very real, very hungry neighbors. Then there's the politics. You hear rumors from traders about princes plotting, church leaders rising, rebellions forming. You nod, but none of it touches your life directly. You care about your firewood pile, your muddy boots, whether the river will freeze solid enough this year to cross without falling through. Occasionally, messengers ride through bearing Mongol edicts. You can't read them. You wait for someone who can. Turns out it says more taxes. Shocking. The Orthodox Church still holds sway, but even the priests are nervous. They pray in candlelit wooden churches that smell like damp wood and old wax. They bless your grain, your animals, and your attempts not to freeze to death. The iconostasis gleams in the dim light, and the incense barely masks the smell of damp wool. One priest insists the Mongols are God's punishment for the people's pride. You think he just likes the sound of his own sermons. Either way, you make the sign of the cross and try not to cough during liturgy. Sneezing is frowned upon. It's contagious and considered rude. In the rare summer months, things look up. The forest clears just enough to plant. The rivers swell. You fish, you grow beets, you patch your roof. Your hands finally stop cracking from the cold, and your face thaws just enough to remember what it felt like to smile. But always, there's the looming thought they might come back. Another raid, another tax, another demand. And not just from the Mongols. Bandits know you're vulnerable. So do rival villages. There's no law as you'd know it. Just local power, good fences, and fast feet. Some try to run into the forest, to other villages, to the wild steppe beyond. Most don't return. One neighbor left in spring. Said he'd heard of a better place beyond the Volga. They found his cart 2 weeks later, smashed and looted. No one talks about it anymore. Your children learn early: stay quiet, stay small, stay useful. You teach them how to spot animal tracks, how to trap a hare, and how to hide a few coins under loose floorboards. You teach them not to cry when the men on horseback appear. At night, the stars blaze above your icy roof. The world feels huge, uncaring, and cold. You huddle under a patched fur blanket, your breath fogging in the dark, and listen for hoofbeats. Or worse, silence. You're not building castles. You're not winning battles. You're enduring through cold, through fear, through endless frozen dawns. And somehow, that's enough. You trade icy winds for dry hills. Though your nerves don't settle, now you're in southern France. And it's not the weather that'll get you. It's the whisper, the wrong word, the neighbor who saw something. Welcome to the Languedoc region during the Inquisition, where belief isn't just personal, it's political. And saying the wrong prayer might earn you a one-way ticket to the stake. The land is deceptively lovely. Olive groves ripple under the sun. Sheep graze on scrubby slopes. And stone villages nestle into the hills like they've always been there. But under the surface, suspicion brews thicker than wine in a monastery barrel. You're surrounded by murmurs and fear, and not just the general medieval kind. This is targeted. The Catholic Church has launched a holy war, not against foreign invaders this time, but against people like you, the heretics. The Cathars, to be specific, who believe in a dualistic universe, good versus evil, soul versus flesh, Spirit versus this annoying tax system. They think the material world is corrupt and inconveniently for the Pope, that includes church wealth and authority. You don't have to be a Cathar to get in trouble. You just have to sound like one, or know one, or look a little too peaceful during the feast day sermons. That's enough. The mainstream historical fact. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX officially authorized the Inquisition, a terrifyingly organized system to root out heresy. In the Languedoc, inquisitors traveled from village to village, taking names, holding trials, and sometimes lighting very unpleasant bonfires. Historians still argue whether the Inquisition was truly about enforcing faith or simply consolidating power in a politically rebellious region. It could be both. But when you're kneeling on a cold floor, being asked if your aunt believes in transubstantiation, you're not worried about philosophy. You live in a tidy stone home. It has one room, one hearth, and one increasingly anxious vibe. You try to keep your head down. You attend Mass. You nod at the priest. You definitely don't mention that your cousin Etienne has stopped eating meat because the body is sinful. That's not dietary choice here, that's heresy with the side of kindling. The local inquisitor arrives without much fanfare, and he's a traveling monk with a sharp pen and an expression like he's been mildly disappointed by everything since birth. He sets up in the church, and suddenly the confessions begin. They call it testimony. It sounds noble. It isn't. People name names out of fear, out of revenge, sometimes just to get the inquisitor to go away. Your neighbor accuses someone of hiding Cathar texts under the floorboards. The accused denies it. They dig up the house, find a suspicious book. It's actually a recipe collection, but by then it's too late. The quirky tidbit. One recorded inquisitorial confession was literally a list of local gossip, including someone's goat getting mysteriously fatter than expected. Heresy. Who knows, but the goat got a lot of side-eye for a while. You stop talking freely. Conversations become tight-lipped, evasive. Everyone says God willing before even simple statements. I'll go to the well, God willing. I'll bake bread if the Lord permits. Because any lack of pious phrasing sounds suspicious. You sneeze and someone crosses themselves twice. Meals are modest lentils, coarse bread, dried figs, maybe goat cheese if you're lucky, and the goat isn't fat again. Wine is thin but necessary. It dulls the tension, even if only for a few sips. You attend Mass twice as often now, not out of faith, out of visibility. You want to be seen praying. You want your neighbors to know you're definitely Orthodox, even if you're silently panicking because that sermon about temptation hit a little too close to home. You pass the local priest in the market. He blesses your vegetables. You pretend not to notice that he's also watching your hands. Your posture, your level of reverence while weighing onions. One night, you hear the knock. It's not loud. It doesn't have to be. You open the door to find two men in brown robes and heavy eyes. We'd like to ask you a few questions, they say. You nod. You let them in. You offer them the good bench, even though it wobbles. They ask about your neighbors, about your habits, about that strange chant someone heard drifting from your house last Tuesday. It was your cousin humming while grinding barley. You explain this. They nod slowly, writing it down with quills that scratch like judgment. After they leave, you sit perfectly still for an hour. You don't even blink. The next day, someone from 2 towns over is marched through the square in chains. No trial today. Just a verdict, read aloud, then silence. You try not to stare. You try not to not stare. Either could look bad. The church offers mercy. If you confess, renounce, repent, you might be spared, but no one tells you what that means. Spared from fire? From exile? From something worse? You consider preemptively confessing just to be safe. But then you remember, what if they think you must be guilty if you're confessing without accusation? It's a trap made of silence and suspicion. And so you become very small, very polite, very careful. You cross yourself at every doorway. You thank God for every turnip. You rehearse basic prayers aloud when no one's around, just to make sure you won't fumble if someone tests you. At night, you lie awake, not because of wolves or wind or ghosts, but because the quiet is louder than anything else. You listen for footsteps, for murmurs, for someone whispering your name in the wrong tone. In a time and place where belief is weaponized, fear becomes your true religion. You fall asleep with the blanket up to your chin, the candle still burning, and a prayer on your lips. Not because you're holy, but because it's the only thing between you and a very short trial. You leave the scorched silences of inquisitorial France behind and step into the wind-lashed, rugged highlands of medieval Scotland. And while the hills here sing with wild beauty, don't let the heather and mist fool you. This place is a battleground. Not of kingdoms, but of clans. And you, poor soul, have landed smack in the middle of a Highland feud. You're not royalty. You're not a knight. You're just a crofter with a patch of land, a few sheep, and the profound misfortune of being born into the wrong surname at the wrong time. Your tunic is patched, your boots leak, and your greatest possession is a wool blanket that doesn't smell too much like goat. The highlands are harsh. The soil is rocky. The winters are bitter. And the wind never shuts up. It whistles through cracks in your turf-roofed hut, rattles the wooden shutters, and occasionally carries away your laundry and your dignity. You build your home low and sturdy, not because it's cute, but because it's harder to spot from a rival's lookout. Clan rivalries in medieval Scotland weren't just dramatic, they were relentless. Feuds spanned generations, sparked by land disputes, livestock theft, insults, and, occasionally, drunken poetry contests gone very wrong. One mainstream historical fact: the McDonald's and Campbell's alone had beef that outlasted dynasties, involving everything from sieges to massacres to awkward family gatherings. Historians still argue whether these endless feuds stemmed from true political necessity or just an impressively generational commitment to holding grudges. Some say it was survival. Others say it was stubbornness with a broadsword. Either way, you're in it. Your clan hates another clan. Maybe you remember why. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. You don't wear their tartan, you don't cross their glen, and you definitely don't flirt with their daughters. Unless you do, then you'd better start running now. Your days are filled with survival. You farm oats. You milk your single cow. Who hates you? You try to keep the roof from caving in every time the wind throws a tantrum. And always, always, you keep an eye on the hills, because that puff of smoke might not be from a cooking fire. It might be a signal. The quirky tidbit. Some Highlanders practiced creech, a sort of legalish cattle raid that was both sport and tradition. You'd sneak into rival land, grab some cows, and ride off in triumph if you weren't caught, and immediately turned into a warning example. It's like medieval rugby with more mooing and slightly more death. You sleep with a weapon nearby, a rusty short sword, maybe a wooden club, not because you expect a battle, but because you expect a message. A torch set to your barn, a warning arrow through the thatch, a missing chicken with suspicious footprints. You keep your allegiance clear. Your clan chief expects loyalty. He doesn't offer much in return, but he might send a cousin to avenge you if things go sideways. Eventually, if it's convenient, the village gossip mill is strong here. Every visitor is eyed with suspicion. Every kilted traveler is scrutinized for tartan patterns. You once offered a stranger oatcakes before realizing he wore the wrong colors. He declined politely but stared at you the whole time like he was deciding where to aim his dirk. Even religious life isn't safe from clan politics. The church might be neutral ground in theory, but in practice, that priest is probably related to someone. You nod through the sermon, make your tithe, and say nothing when someone coughs a little too pointedly during the homily on forgiveness. Meals are simple. Oats, again, boiled turnips, maybe some dried venison if your cousin had a good hunt and wasn't ambushed on the way home. You eat fast, quietly. The table creaks, the wind howls, and you hope the stew's meat wasn't recently stolen. Then there are the gatherings, celebrations, weddings, feasts. They start with dancing and end with a fist fight every single time. Someone insults someone else's cousin's sheep. A punch is thrown. The fiddler ducks. You hold your bowl close and try not to get dragged into it. Again. And if you're summoned to join a raid, you go. Not because you want to, but because refusing means you might come home to a burned-out hut and a missing cow. Loyalty here isn't optional, it's hereditary, like freckles or a fear of the McClouds. Your nights are filled with smoke, laughter, the occasional scream, and the constant gnawing of cold. The wind seeps through everything. You stuff every crack with moss. You wear 3 layers of wool. You still shiver. One guy in your village, Dougal, swears he saw a ghost by the loch. Wailing woman, glowing eyes. The whole deal. You believe him. Not because you fear ghosts, but because if you were murdered during a clan feud and tossed into a bog, you'd want to haunt someone too. There's a sort of pride in Highland life. You suffer, but you do it with flair. You play your pipes loud. You stomp through the muck with purpose. You name your sword, even if it's mostly for chopping turnips. You recite family lines back 12 generations, even if half of them were cattle thieves and at least one was definitely cursed. But peace rare, fleeting. You grab it when you can. A quiet evening by the hearth, a successful harvest, a full pot of stew and no arrows in your roof. You lie down beside the smoldering fire, wrapped in scratchy blankets, listening to the crackle of peat and the distant wind in the pines. And you hope that tonight, no torches appear on the ridge. You trade the cold winds of the highlands for the dry, sun-bleached heat of the eastern Mediterranean and instantly regret it. You're now living on the outskirts of a crusader outpost, somewhere between the holy and the hopeless. Welcome to the Levant during the Crusades, where you get all the chaos of a war zone and none of the divine perks. You're not a knight. You're not a priest. You're one of the thousands of civilians locals, settlers, refugees, traders just trying to live a very quiet, very uncrusady life on the edge of boiling point geopolitics. Your house is made of sun-baked mud bricks. Your diet consists of whatever hasn't been requisitioned by a passing army. And your closest neighbor is a wall, a literal wall, because you live just outside it, not inside the actual fortified Crusader city. That's for the rich folks and knights who wear chainmail at breakfast. Your little village huddles along the outer edges of places like Acre, Tyre, or Antioch, full of people who wanted a better life, or at least one slightly less filled with plague and burning. Surprise! You're still getting both. One mainstream historical fact: during the Crusades 1095-1291, the Latin Christians established a series of kingdoms and castles across the Levant. But holding territory meant constant defense, diplomacy, and brutal taxation. Locals, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish alike, were often caught in the crossfire, living under new rulers who barely understood the terrain, much less the people. You step outside, and there it is, the heat. A punishing sun that seems determined to boil your brain through your skull. You wear a head wrap now, even though it smells like your old boots. It's that or sunstroke. Your sandals are made from camel hide, held together with string and a prayer. And yes, you've learned a few Arabic phrases even if you're technically a Frank. You need them for the market, for directions, and for when you need to politely explain to local militia that you're not a spy, just an idiot farmer trying to sell garlic. Historians still argue whether the Crusader states were functioning political entities or doomed military outposts held together with force and desperation. From your perspective, it's mostly bureaucracy with the side of panic. Every other week, someone new is in charge, and they all want taxes, allegiance, and your best chicken. The local garrison is nearby. It smells like leather, sweat, and horses who gave up a long time ago. The knights occasionally stomp through your village looking important, then disappear back into their walled cities, leaving behind broken fences and the lingering scent of self-righteousness. You don't own much: a few goats, a plot of barley, and one good cloak that you wear on feast days and whenever the tax collector shows up. You sleep on a woven mat, under a thatched roof that doesn't even try to keep out the dust. It's a miracle you don't wake up as a small dune. The quirky tidbit: some Crusader outposts were so desperate for local support that they hired Muslim and Jewish administrators to run the day-to-day affairs. You once met a Jewish tax clerk who did math faster than you could blink and had absolutely zero patience for knights who couldn't count past 12 without removing a gauntlet. Your meals are a mix of cultures and compromises: lentils, chickpeas, flatbread, dried figs. If the local guards haven't raided your storage, maybe some salted fish or goat cheese. Spices: forget it. That cinnamon's going to the nobles. You get garlic, onion, and the occasional wild herb you can't quite identify. You fetch water from a shared cistern. It's only sometimes clean, always warm, and guarded by a woman with one eye and a very sharp stick. You don't ask what happened to the other eye, or the last person who cut the line. And then there's the fear, not constant but lingering. Raids, retaliations, skirmishes that start with a horn blast and end with fire. You keep a small bundle of essentials by your door: dried food, your coin pouch, and the keys to your goat pen. If the city gets attacked, you know exactly how long it takes to run to the fortress gates. 17 seconds. You've timed it. Sometimes a preacher shows up. He talks about Jerusalem, about sin and salvation. You nod, but you're more concerned about whether your roof is going to collapse during the next sandstorm. You don't have the luxury of holy quests. You're too busy trying to fix your cartwheel with a chicken bone. And yes, there are relics, bits of the true cross, saints' fingers, holy water said to cure gout and bad breath. You've seen merchants sell rocks from the Sea of Galilee like they're diamonds. One guy even claimed he had Moses' original walking stick. It looks suspiciously like a broom handle. The children here speak 3 languages badly and can swear fluently in all of them. They play in the dust with toy swords and imaginary armies. You try to keep them from climbing the city wall, but they're determined to find out what's on the other side. You already know. It's just more dust. And more danger. At night, the stars shine bright and indifferent. Dogs bark. Somewhere, someone argues in Latin. The wind carries the sound of distant hoofbeats and maybe a lullaby from a mother trying to calm a child who's too young to be afraid and too smart not to be. You lie down beside your tools. Your hands are rough, your back aches, and the calluses on your feet have their own calluses. And in your dreams, there's no war, no walls, just rain. A soft drizzle on green fields. You don't even mind the mud. You wake with the sun already baking your roof. A new day, another chance to stay invisible. Because out here on the edge of empires, survival is the only crusade that really matters. You leave the dusty borderlands of the Crusader states and wade into something much wetter, and not in a refreshing way. You're now knee-deep in the Hungarian plain, a flat, endless stretch of land that seems to alternate only between flood and famine. Welcome to one of the worst places to farm in the medieval world, the great floodplain of Central Europe, where every sunrise brings the same question: will the land let me live today? From the moment you step into your village, your boots are soaked. Not just muddy, soaked. The ground squelches with every step, like the earth itself is sighing under the weight of your expectations. You glance behind you. Your footprints instantly fill with water. This place what historians call the Alfold, or the Great Hungarian Plain, was both fertile and furious. When it worked, crops grew tall, livestock flourished, and peasants like you could eke out a modest life. But when the rains came, which they often did, your field became a swamp, your house a bog hut, and your sheep disgusted. One mainstream historical fact, medieval Hungary, particularly in the 13th and 14th centuries, was a vital crossroads of trade and agriculture, especially under rulers like Bela IV and Louis the Great. But that same geography made it vulnerable to environmental chaos floods, droughts, and sudden cold snaps that killed more crops than any invader could. Your home is built on a slightly raised mound of earth, not because it's scenic, but because the last flood swallowed the lower village. Only the steeple survived. It's now home to 3 storks and a family of resentful bats. Your walls are wattle and daub, your roof thatched with reeds, and your floor perpetually damp. You've tried straw, old rugs, even layering flat stones. Still, your socks squish. Always, you haven't had a dry night in months. The quirky tidbit: some villagers use stilts to walk between homes during heavy flood seasons. Yes, stilts. And not for fun. You once saw your neighbor fall into a flooded cabbage patch wearing his good stilts. He hasn't been the same since. Mosquitoes rule here. They swarm in biblical clouds, so thick they could probably carry off a toddler if they coordinated. You sleep under linen, burn green branches for smoke, and still wake up looking like a poxed up porridge ladle. Historians still argue whether the periodic flooding of the Hungarian plain ultimately benefited agriculture by refertilizing the soil, or whether it caused more displacement and hardship than it was worth. You're leaning toward hardship, especially since your only wheat crop just floated away with half your tools, and that's not even getting into the storms. Thunder rolls in like an army, flattens your thatch roof, and drags your clothesline into the next county. You try to collect rainwater, but everything fills up so fast it overflows. And by morning, you're drinking from what may or may not be a goat's old bath. Speaking of goats, they're miserable here. The mud pulls at their hooves, and they bleed in despair. You feed them last year's hay and whisper encouragement. They look at you like you're the reason the river hates them. And when the waters finally do recede, the fields don't bounce back. They sulk. What isn't drowned is either rotted, moldy, or stolen by roving bands of thieves who figured out that soggy peasants are easy targets. Your grain silo collapsed last week because the supports rotted out. You salvaged 2 sacks and some moldy barley that you're calling aged. You eat whatever's left: sour bread, boiled roots, pickled turnips, and stews that make you question your choices. Once you made soup with mystery greens from the marsh. You couldn't see straight for 2 days. The priest said it was divine punishment. You think it was just toxic salad? Oh yes, the church is still standing somehow. Built from stone, perched on the only high ground around. They call it the hill, but it's maybe 6 feet higher than the village. The priest wears boots made of stitched cowhide and carries a long staff, not for spiritual reasons, but because the geese get aggressive during flood season. And there are always rumors of better land upriver, of foreign lords offering drier fields, of magical drainage ditches that lead to paradise. You've never seen them, but the stories keep people here from packing up and leaving. Mostly. Sometimes soldiers come through, Hungarian. Sometimes Mongol stragglers. Sometimes just bandits in uniforms pretending to be tax collectors. You hide what little you have, bury it in jars under the floorboards, which you later forget because the floorboards all look the same and half the house is underwater again. And yet, you endure. You patch the roof. You bail water. You dig trenches that the river immediately laughs at. You chase off ducks from your granary. You make shoes from bark and waterproof them with pig fat. You try, day after soggy day, to just keep going. You've built up a tolerance physically and emotionally to mildew, to damp clothing, to disappointment. Your skin is permanently wrinkled. Your sense of humor, also damp, but still there. Night falls slowly here, through mist and buzzing insect clouds. You light a tiny fire on a dry patch of floor, boil whatever survived dinner, and fall asleep to the soft gurgle of water under your bed. You hope it doesn't rise tonight. Sleep, if you can. Tomorrow you rebuild. Again, you slog your way out of the floodplains, boots squelching, only to find yourself in terrain that's still damp. But this time it's not just wet, it's watching. You've reached the marshy, brooding borderlands of medieval Wales. Welcome to a place where the land is as moody as the people. Rebellion simmers just below the surface, and Norman castles loom like stone scowls on every hilltop. It's the 12th century. You're a Welsh villager, or at least you were until the Normans arrived. Now you're technically a subject of some baron with an unpronounceable name and a fondness for collecting taxes and building fortifications. Your home lies in the marches, the muddy, muddled strip of land between English control and full Welsh independence. And let's be honest, nobody feels at home here. You step into your village, a tight cluster of timber huts half sunk into boggy ground. The air smells of damp earth, burning pot, and just the faintest hint of livestock frustration. You live in a one-room hut with a turf roof, woven walls, and a floor that's more natural sponge than solid ground. Everything here is about proximity to the castle, to the marsh, to danger. You're close enough to hear the bells from the Norman Motte and Bailey fortress on the hill, close enough to see the guards ride out for patrols, and close enough to know that if you so much as sneeze in the direction of the garrison, you'll be explaining it to a man in chainmail who thinks Welsh is just a series of suspicious coughs. One mainstream historical fact. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, William the Conqueror and his successors launched a slow, steady invasion into Wales. They built castles all over the borderland, strategically placed to suppress rebellion and assert dominance. Think of them as medieval, you're being watched, signs carved in stone. And watched you are. Your every move feels like it echoes. You tend your small flock of sheep in the misty fields, but always with one eye on the hilltop. You patch your roof with reeds, but you make sure it doesn't look too sturdy, don't want to attract attention. If it looks like you're doing too well, someone might reassess your taxes. And, oh, the taxes. If it's not grain, it's wool. If it's not wool, it's labor. Some days you're summoned to help build yet another wooden bridge over yet another marsh that will eat it within a season. You don't ask questions. You just carry the wood and hope your boots hold together long enough to get home before the sun disappears behind the hills. Historians still argue whether the Marcher lords, the Normans tasked with overseeing the borderlands, brought stability to the region or simply introduced a new flavor of chaos. One thing's for sure, the people beneath them had very little say in the matter. The quirky tidbit. Some Welsh rebels fought in near silence, communicating via carved sticks and coded messages woven into clothing patterns. You once saw a traveling bard with strange stitching on his cloak. You asked about it. He winked. You never asked again. Daily life is a delicate dance. You speak Welsh at home, but sprinkle your sentences with English when the steward walks by. You light candles at church, but still leave offerings at the old stone near the riverbank, just in case the old gods are listening. You don't talk politics. You don't talk loudly. You just try not to be noticed. Your meals are humble leeks. Barley, goat cheese, dried apples, and the occasional trout when you can catch it without falling in. You've made peace with a diet of mostly gray and green, sometimes brown. Once, it was red. You still don't know what that stew was, but it tasted vaguely heroic. The land is beautiful, though. Wild. The hills rise like ancient slumbering beasts. The forests whisper with centuries-old secrets, and the marshes glow with morning mist that makes everything look like it belongs in a dream. Or a warning. And then there are the whispers of rebellion, of Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, of Owain, of this or that group of men slipping off into the woods at night. You know where they're going. You know what they're planning. You just keep your head down and pretend your ears are clogged with sheep wool. Until one day, A soldier asks you a question. Have you seen anyone unusual? You freeze. You think of your cousin. You think of the song you heard last night, too bold for a lullaby. You say, no, sir, and grip your basket so tight the handles dig into your palms. The soldier narrows his eyes. He rides on. You exhale. That night, you sit by the hearth, your hands smelling of wet sheep and worry. Outside, the marsh bubbles. Not ominously, just naturally, you think. You hope. The priest says peace will come. The bard says fire will come. Your grandmother says it doesn't matter, just keep the door barred and the chickens fed. And so, you do. You close your eyes to the sound of damp wood popping in the fire and wind pressing against your walls like it's testing your resolve. You dream of drier lands, of castles you could live in, of days when you won't have to lie about what language you dream in. But for now, it's mud, moss, and a cautious nod good night. You leave the misty Welsh marshlands behind, though several layers of mud seem to follow you and climb. Higher and higher, your legs aching, the air thinning. Welcome to the high mountain villages of the Alps, where the views are breathtaking, mostly because the altitude's already taken your breath away. It's the 14th century, and you now live somewhere precariously perched between goat pasture and glacier. The sun might be shining, but don't let that fool you. Life here is a game of which will kill me first. Frostbite rockslide or cow-related incident, because while the valleys below may be fair, you've chosen or been born into a village that clings to the Alps like moss on a stone. Cold, scrappy, and constantly at risk of sliding into oblivion. Your home is a narrow wooden chalet, 2 stories if you're lucky, balanced on a slope so steep you have to tie your firewood in bundles so it doesn't roll into next week. The roof is covered in heavy slate tiles, not for aesthetics, but because without the weight, it might just fly off in the next windstorm. You share your house with family, goats, hay, and the occasional marmot who sneaks in to steal warmth. The ground floor is for animals. The people live upstairs. Not for comfort, just because the body heat rising from the livestock might keep your toes from going completely numb at night. One mainstream historical fact. Alpine communities, especially those in regions like Tyrol and the Swiss cantons, began organizing into self-governing communes as early as the 13th century. They had to. Central authorities were too far away to help. So villagers relied on tight-knit cooperation to survive the extremes, both weather and politics. Historians still argue whether these rugged mountain societies were peaceful backwaters or subtly political havens of proto-democracy. You're more concerned with whether the next snowstorm will crush your barn. Because the weather brutal? Winters last most of the year. Summer is that 2-week period when the snow melts just enough to reveal the rocks beneath. Avalanches are a regular threat, massive, thunderous, and completely unpredictable. You've lost 2 sheds and 1 very unlucky chicken to them. There's no road, not really, just a winding, slippery path that leads down the slope and zigzags so tight it feels like a goat designed it. In winter, it's unusable. In spring, it's worse. You rely on sleds, mules, and strong legs to carry anything in or anyone out. And yes, you're self-sufficient to a terrifying degree. You grow barley and rye on impossibly steep terraces you helped build by hand. You milk goats, churn cheese, and dry meat for the months when everything is snowed under and silence becomes its own language. Your diet heavy. Bread, cheese, dried apples, fermented cabbage, and if it's a feast day, maybe sausage. You need the calories. Just walking to the granary is a cardiovascular event. The quirky tidbit: some alpine communities practiced vertical transhumance, where herders moved livestock to higher pastures in summer and lower valleys in winter. You live halfway between both, which means you mostly just get trampled by everyone going either direction. You own snowshoes. Not for fashion, though. They do make your ankles look bold, but because walking without them means disappearing into a drift up to your ears. Your cloak is lined with wool. Your boots are stuffed with moss. And your gloves are thick enough to punch frost in the face. And then there are the neighbors. You love them. You rely on them. But after 6 months of being snowed in with the same 10 people, you start dreaming of anyone else. You've had the same argument about goat breeds 7 times this month. You've memorized your uncle's chewing rhythm. The silence outside is peaceful. The silence inside slightly aggressive. Sometimes, a traveling priest makes the journey up. He stays a day or two, blesses the houses, eats enough cheese to become part of the local fauna, and leaves with frost on his beard and several cryptic complaints about the devil in the cliffs. You think he's just scared of heights. You carve things to pass the time: wooden spoons. Religious symbols. One very detailed bear figurine you're not emotionally ready to talk about. You sing. You embroider. You tell the same stories your grandmother told. You pretend the walls aren't closing in. And sometimes there are visitors. Traders, mercenaries, messengers. They bring stories from the lowlands. Strange goods and occasionally diseases. You try to smile, but you're already checking their coughs and edging the door slightly closed behind them. You've heard of cities, of places where the houses have glass windows, where people gather in churches larger than your entire village, and where the bread doesn't taste faintly of snowshoe. You believe those places exist. You just doubt you'll ever reach one. But even in the worst of it, when the snow is 6 feet deep, the sky's gone gray for the 7th week in a row, and you've eaten so much goat cheese you dream in bleats you survive. You laugh. You light candles in the dark. You tell stories of saints and wolves and the time old man Jacob swore he saw a dragon near the glacier. You fall asleep under firs, next to the fire, the wind pressing against the shutters like it's asking to come inside. And you whisper, "Not tonight." You descend finally from the perilous ridges of the Alps, hoping for something warmer, easier, maybe even a little Mediterranean sunshine. And you get it. Welcome to the sun-drenched hills of southern Italy, to a little village nestled near the Bay of Naples. It's beautiful. It's ancient. It smells faintly of lemons, and it sits right beneath a sleeping giant. You, my unfortunate wanderer, now live in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The volcano hasn't erupted in generations, and locals say it's calm, sleeping, benign. But you're not fooled. You've seen the steam on the windless days, the way birds avoid the upper slopes, the fact that even the goats give it side-eye. It's not asleep. It's waiting. Still, the land is good. Scarily good. Volcanic soil makes for excellent farming, and you're part of a thriving rural community that grows olives, grapes, figs, and enough vegetables to feed half of Naples if you don't eat them all first. Your little stone house is shaded by a trellis of grapevines. Chickens wander freely. It would be idyllic if you weren't constantly wondering when the mountain might hiccup. One mainstream historical fact: Mount Vesuvius is most famous for its catastrophic eruption in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum in ash. But what's less often remembered is that the volcano continued to erupt well into the medieval period, including major outbursts in the 5th plus ninth and 11th centuries. Medieval Neapolitans lived with the mountain as a ticking, rumbling, steaming clock. And unlike today, there's no science to warn you. No seismographs, no evacuation plans, just folk tales and vague feelings. When the ground shakes, you pray. When smoke curls from the summit, you say it's just morning mist and keep hoeing the field. Historians still argue whether medieval communities genuinely believed Vesuvius would erupt again, or if they simply ignored the risk in favor of the daily grind. Some say the danger was spiritualized, seen as divine punishment or even a test of faith. Others believe it was just plain denial, and you call it Tuesday. You eat well here. Bread baked in outdoor ovens, stews laced with herbs, the occasional fish caught from the bay when you've got the energy to walk that far. And the wine. Oh, the wine, made from vines grown on those nutrient-rich hillsides. It's strong, slightly cloudy, and tastes like sun-drenched survival. Your quirky tidbit locals believe the volcano was home to saints or demons depending on who you asked. Some claimed it was the gateway to purgatory. Others said it housed an imprisoned giant. You don't take sides. You just mutter an apology every time you harvest from the northern slope. Life is deceptively stable. You rise with the sun, tend your garden, barter at the village market, repair your tools, sing with your neighbors. It's a tightly woven community where everyone knows everyone's business and half of them are cousins. There's peace in routine until there's not. One morning, you feel it a rumble, faint but present. Your cup trembles on the table. The animals grow quiet. Someone says it's thunder, but there are no clouds. The priest rings the bell anyway, just in case. Still, what can you do? You don't have another home. You've invested years in this field, this wall, this roof you patched a dozen times. You could leave, but to where and why abandon a place that's mostly calm a few days later? Ash starts to fall light, gray like snow with bad intentions. You wrap a scarf around your face and keep digging your irrigation trench. You pretend it's nothing. So does everyone else. But no one makes eye contact. The castle up the hill, home to your local noble, sends a messenger with encouraging words. The mountain is stable, the scroll says. The Lord watches over us. You notice the noble has already relocated to a different castle. You keep that detail to yourself. When night falls, you climb onto your roof. From here, you can see the red glow at the summit, faint but unmistakable. Your neighbor says it's just natural fire. You nod. You don't believe him. But what do? You got crop in the ground, livestock in the shed, and a half-finished batch of wine fermenting under the floorboards. You say your prayers, you check your escape route, you reinforce the door with whatever planks you have left, and still, you stay, because for all its danger, the land here gives so much: rich soil, mild winters, a Mediterranean breeze that smells like thyme and salt. You've lived here your whole life. So did your parents. You'll probably be buried under the lemon tree outback volcano or not. You learn to read the mountain like a moody family member. You know when it's just grumbling and when it's truly angry. You build your walls strong. your roof sloped, your pantry stocked. You don't wait for disaster, but you don't run from it either. Somehow, this becomes normal. You fall asleep to the distant hiss of steam vents and the soft hum of crickets. Your dreams are full of vineyards, glowing hillsides, and the strange peace of knowing nothing is ever truly safe. And when you wake, and the sun lights the summit gold, you whisper a quiet thanks. Not for safety, but for another ordinary day. You leave sun-baked Vesuvius behind and head north and east, deep into the shadowy woods of Bohemia. The trees grow thicker, taller, and closer together until the forest seems to swallow the sky. You've now entered the Czech lands during the time of the Hussite Wars, a period of ideological chaos. Peasant revolts, exploding beer barrels, and an overwhelming sense that no one is in charge anymore. You live in a small settlement tucked between dense woods and hilly fields. Close enough to Prague to hear rumors, far enough to still have your roof intact. It's the early 15th century. The forests are dense, the politics are denser, and you just want to survive long enough to harvest your oats. This isn't a tidy war. It's not knights on horseback clashing under banners. It's militia groups in patched armor, armed with farm tools and fire, sweeping across the countryside in the name of Jan Hus. The Czech reformer burned at the stake in 1415. His ideas that the church was corrupt, that the people should have more say, that everyone should receive both bread and wine at communion, lit a fire across Bohemia. A very literal one. One mainstream historical fact, the Hussite Wars 1419-1434, pitted radical religious reformers, many of them peasants and townsfolk, against royalist and Catholic forces. The rebels weren't just angry, they were organized. The Taborites, one major Hussite faction, turned wagons into mobile fortresses and led some of the most inventive battlefield tactics of the era. Historians still argue whether the movement was proto-Protestantism or a uniquely Czech rebellion rooted in nationalism and economic resentment. But from your perspective, it just means a lot of heavily armed people are very angry, and none of them are asking for your opinion before marching through your field. Your village is no longer peaceful. There was once a small church here. It's gone now, burned last spring in a skirmish. Half the villagers joined the Hussites. The other half stayed neutral. Everyone's tense. The only unifying force now is the shared hope that the beer doesn't run out. Speaking of beer, yes, there's plenty, and it's strong. Brewing is sacred in Bohemia, and every village has its own recipe. Yours, however, is not famous for the flavor. You once drank a batch that exploded during fermentation. You're still deaf in one ear. Your quirky tidbit Hussite troops sometimes used barrels of flammable liquid like crude beer dregs, mixed with pitch as makeshift weapons. Rolling them downhill toward enemy camps was both a tactical and psychological choice. If the flames didn't get you, the smell probably did. You've learned to recognize the sound of a marching column, not from drums but from the creak of wheels, the thud of boots, and the chant of defiance. Sometimes they pass by, sometimes they stop. When they do, they demand food, shelter, and allegiance. You provide all three, with trembling hands. Your house is made of wood and wattle. The roof leaks, but it's still standing. Unlike your neighbors. You've stuffed the walls with hay to block out the winter chill, and tried not to notice that the pigs have started using your porch as a communal spa. The forest nearby is beautiful if you like your beauty dark, damp, and a little bit cursed. You gather mushrooms, collect firewood, and keep your eyes peeled for bandits or lone riders looking for donations. The trees whisper constantly. You try not to listen too closely. Meals are heavy on grain, light on everything else. You boil porridge until it sticks to your spoon like plaster. You chew dried beans that might also be rocks. When you do get meat, it's rabbit usually shared among too many people to taste much. If you're lucky, a merchant sneaks through with spices. You trade him 3 eggs and a button for a pinch of something that might be pepper. The priest in your village left months ago. He said he was going to find clarity. He took the wine chalice with him. Some say he joined the royalists. Others say he ran off to become a hermit. You just hope he's somewhere warmer. Now, your spiritual life is led by old Marta, who claims she saw John Hus in a dream and that he told her to give sermons in the barn. They're mostly about not stealing turnips and helping your neighbors. You go, partly out of faith, mostly out of curiosity. You try to keep your head down, but everyone is watching everyone else. Did you attend the Hussite sermon? Did you skip it? Do you still pray to saints? Do you say the Lord's Prayer in Latin or check one? Wrong answer, and suddenly your stable is on fire. Your children play war in the dirt with carved wooden wagons, mimicking the Taborite formations they've seen. They chant war hymns and throw clumps of moss like grenades. You pretend it's cute. You worry it's practice. There's a constant tension in the air. Like a string pulled tight across the land, you don't know who controls what anymore. Towns change hands. Fortresses fall. The news is always late and always terrifying. And yet, you still rise before dawn. You still sweep your doorstep. You still water the turnips like they're not growing in the middle of a civil war. Because what else can you do? At night, the woods are too quiet. No birds, just wind, creaking trees, and the occasional howl you tell yourself is a dog. You lock your doors, though, they wouldn't stop anyone serious. You tuck your kids in with a lullaby and a firm whisper. Don't answer the door. Not for anyone. You lie beside the hearth, staring at the beam ceiling, counting the days since the last column passed through. You hope the next one doesn't arrive tomorrow, and if it does, you'll nod, you'll smile, you'll offer soup, and pray they leave before asking what you really believe. You slip quietly out of Bohemia's troubled forests, heading south along the spine of the Carpathians, then eastward until the ground flattens and your boots begin to squelch. The Danube lies ahead, wide, slow, and deceptively majestic, but you're not settling in the river city. Oh no, you're living out in the low, marshy settlements that hug the great river's edge like stubborn scabs. Welcome to the Danube swamps, where the land is soggy, the air is thick, and everything, including your prospects, is just a little bit moldy. From the moment you arrive, your nostrils are assaulted. The smell of stagnant water, decaying reeds, and the ever-present perfume of wet livestock hits like a moist slap. You inhale through your mouth. It's worse. Your village is a loose scattering of reed-thatched huts perched on slightly raised patches of land surrounded by waterlogged fields. People here walk in wooden clogs and mud-caked boots, often with the resigned gait of those who've lost a shoe to a bog hole. Your own foot makes a gentle schlorp as it disappears ankle-deep into the earth. You pull it out. You've lost the boot. Living here means constantly balancing on the edge of cultivation and collapse. The soil is rich when it's not underwater. The river provides fish, reeds, and occasional trade, but it also floods like it's got unresolved anger issues. One good storm, and your entire winter food store could be floating downstream toward the Black Sea. One mainstream historical fact: the Danube floodplains have been populated since antiquity, and in the medieval period, particularly in parts of Hungary, Romania, and Serbia, they were dotted with small villages that relied on fishing, wetland farming, and seasonal livestock grazing. These communities often existed in a fragile state of semi-isolation, cut off during floods and neglected by both kings and bishops. Historians still argue whether these swamp settlements were strategic sanctuaries from raids or just places people ended up when nowhere else would take them. Probably both. It's the kind of place you don't find unless you're running from something. Your quirky tidbit locals used bundles of reeds as flotation devices, literally strapping them to their backs to wade through deeper water. Children were taught to swim before they could walk. You've yet to master either. Your home is raised slightly off the ground, standing on logs that sink further each year. You patch the roof with woven cattails and hope the next rain doesn't find the hole above your sleeping spot. You sleep on a platform to avoid the floor, which is often soggy and, in one memorable incident, briefly hosted an eel. You eat what you can get: fish small, bony, and boiled into oblivion. Wild onions, soggy turnips, and bread that tastes like damp laundry. Some families keep pigs, who wade through the muck with an attitude that implies they know they're doing better than you. Fresh water is a problem. The river is full of life and also things you shouldn't drink. You try to collect rain in barrels, but they keep tipping over in the mud. You boil what you can. You pray about the rest. Illness is everywhere. The air is thick with gnats, the kind that swarm your face and fly directly into your mouth at inopportune moments. You get fevers that last for days, rashes, strange bumps. Everyone has a persistent cough. It's like a badge of honor. You meet someone who isn't coughing, and you assume they're new or already dead. There's a healer in the village. Of course, she smells of bog mint and wet wool and insists she can cure anything with poultices made of river slime and garlic. You nod and try it once. You're still itchy. But now you also smell like soup. Sometimes the bishop's tax agent arrives by boat. He demands tribute in eels or bundles of reeds. You give him the former. He complains, but leaves. The next time, he brings soldiers and demands silver. You don't have any. He takes your fishing net. You spend the next month knotting a new one from salvaged twine and spite. The church is a wooden shack that lists to one side like it's tired of being holy in a swamp. The priest mostly mumbles, keeps sermons short, and blesses babies while standing on a flat rock that doesn't sink too fast. His beard is mossy. His homilies are shorter in flood season. You know the flood is coming before you even see the river. The air changes. The frogs go quiet. The old woman who lives on the edge of the reed starts muttering about last time. You pack what you can in a reed basket, hoist your youngest onto your shoulders, and wade uphill to the emergency shelter, a hilltop barn with half a roof and twice as many rats as residents. And when the water rises, you watch your world transform. Fields disappear, paths vanish, chickens roost in trees, boats appear like ghosts, half-rotted canoes tied together with rope and hope. You wonder what's worse, the floods or the aftermath. You return to find your home still standing. Just barely. The mud line reaches your windowsill. Everything smells of mildew. You scoop out water with a bowl, muttering prayers to St. Anthony and whoever else might listen. You find your missin's boot. It's grown moss, and yet you rebuild. Again, because here, survival is an art form. You learn the rhythms of the river, the tricks of the wind, the timing of frog song before rain. You tie ropes between huts to navigate the mist. You teach your kids how to fish with their hands. You don't waste anything, not even your complaints. At night, the swamp hums, insects buzz, water gurgles beneath your floor. Somewhere, a heron calls out. You lie back, scratch another bite, and wrap yourself in a damp blanket that smells like river and firewood. It's not paradise, but it's home. For now, you finally drag yourself itchy, damp, and slightly eel-scented out of the Danube swamps and toward a settlement where things are supposed to be different. Cleaner, safer, more stable. And in a way, they are. You've got a roof over your head, your own cottage, and a regular source of income. The catch: you're the town executioner. Welcome to the worst job with the steadiest pay in medieval Europe. You're not at war. You're not starving in a bog. You're not ducking plague carts or watching your house slide into a marsh. No, you get meat, a stipend, and a house with real walls. And everyone in town hates you. One mainstream historical fact: executioners in the Middle Ages were often given decent pay, housing, and land, but lived as social pariahs. Their role was essential to justice systems, but they were considered unclean, sometimes barred from public spaces, churches, and even from touching food at markets. You're needed. You're also avoided like a coughing rat. Historians still argue whether the role of the executioner evolved from butcher guilds or from convicted criminals forced into the trade. Many were trained, even skilled, but all were treated like a necessary evil. You could be literate, organized, and respected by local officials and still not get invited to a single wedding. Your house. It's on the edge of town. Not scenic edge, emotional edge. It's a decent place, stone walls, a hearth, even a small garden, but no one walks past it unless they have to. Children whisper stories about it. Dogs bark at it. The baker once dropped your loaf on the ground and refused to hand it to you directly. You picked it up yourself. Same price. You're not allowed to attend Mass with everyone else. You stand at the back, alone. The priest gives you a cautious blessing, and people step aside as you leave like your very breath might stain their soul. You once tried to buy candles at the market. The merchant tossed them toward you like she was feeding a wolf. The quirky tidbit: some towns allowed executioners to take certain spoils from the condemned: clothing, personal belongings, even leftover food. You once inherited a goat. You've named it Judged. You wear gloves at all times. Not for fashion, though they do give you an air of mysterious doom, but because touching people directly makes them cross themselves and mumble protection prayers. You once tapped someone's shoulder by mistake. They yelped like you'd handed them a scorpion. The work itself: gruesome, yes, but also bureaucratic. You maintain your tools meticulously. Your sword must be sharp, your ropes clean, your axe oiled. You have a ledger with dates, names, and cause of death. You keep it neat. You are, one after all, a professional. Sometimes you deal with criminals, thieves, traitors, murderers. Sometimes it's less clear. a widow accused of poisoning, a merchant caught with heretical books, a farmer who said the wrong thing at the wrong tavern. You don't decide who dies, you just make it official. People assume you're cruel, that you relish your role. But the truth, you're just very tired. Tired of the long walk through silent crowds. Tired of the way people look away, even when you're not working. Tired of cleaning up after a job no one else wants to admit happens. Your only consistent visitor is the town bailiff. He brings the orders. He drinks your beer. He leaves quickly. Once he asked how you sleep at night. Like everyone else, you said, with bad dreams. And they are bad. You've seen faces that don't leave your memory. Heard pleas that echo when you stir the stew pot. The worst when someone goes quietly. Or thanks you. You have a small garden. Herbs, mostly. Quiet work. The goat grazes nearby. You read sometimes. Mostly old texts taken from condemned criminals. One was about astronomy. You become quite knowledgeable about stars. And sometimes, someone needs you. The local healer cuts her hand while treating a wound. She comes to you not because she likes you, but because no one else will stitch her up. You do it gently. She nods once. Leaves. Never says thank you. But you feel it. There are towns where the executioner wears a hood. Yours never did. You tried it once, made no difference. You were still you. You don't talk much. You don't joke. But in the privacy of your home, you sometimes hum old songs. You remember them from childhood before the town gave you this role. Before your touch turned to silence. Because once, long ago, you were just a boy with good handwriting. The magistrate noticed. And after the old executioner died, someone said your name in a meeting you weren't invited to. And that was it. No ceremony, no applause, just a job. And now, as night falls, and the town sleeps behind shuttered windows, you sit by your hearth with your goat, a cup of cheap wine, and the faint scent of rosemary. The wind rattles the shutters. The stars shine cold and clear above your roof, and somewhere in the silence, you almost feel human again. You've trudged through swamps and snowdrifts, through fire traps and futile nightmares, and now you've reached the end. It's quiet here. The chaos, the coughing, the creaking floorboards, they all fade behind you like the smoke of an old hearth extinguished. Breathe. Let the sound of the wind over the Danube soften into the hush of a gentle fan in your room. Let the clatter of carts and the whisper of prayers settle like dust in a stone chapel. Long forgotten. The worst is behind you. No more raids, no more ropes. Just you, here, in the calm after the storm of centuries. The ground is dry, the stars above you steady. The past, with all its strange smells and scratchy wool, shrinks to a quiet story told beside a modern pillow. In this soft pause, even the worst places become distant. Their rough edges blur like mist over a medieval field. Their noise dims. Their cold recedes. You're safe now. The candlelight is warm. The air still. And even the old executioner, somewhere far away in the dark, is finally laying down his axe. Turning to the fire, exhaling. So rest now, let go of the cobbled streets and smoky taverns, the howling wind through alpine slats, the splash of boots in a peat bog. They'll wait for another night. But you can sleep.